In the Gospel of Matthew, not today's Gospel, but the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus says, "Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for my yoke is easy and my burden is light." Beautiful, comforting words. And so what is the yoke? What is the yoke that God has given us? And it's to follow his commands, right? Today's gospel calls us to, says that if you want to show your love for God, you do it by following his commandments. So it's a yoke, and they show your love for God by following the commandments. And what are his commandments? It's simply to love God and love your neighbor. And you show your love for God by how you love your neighbor. Now, our gospel is really, a very simple message, and it's to follow God's commandments. And just very simple, love God and neighbor. And then our first reading from Acts of the Apostles, there's been some Pharisees who have converted to the faith, to the Christians. And so this is like 14 years after the resurrection. And their custom is to follow the Jewish laws, plus Jesus' commandments, love God and love neighbor. And they're full of zeal. And so they're still following the Old Testament customs and ways because they're with all Jews, and that's the way they do it. But the pagans that are converting don't have the same customs, but they're still following Jesus' law of love God and neighbor. But these Pharisees are so zealous about what they're doing, they're full of zeal, they go up to Antioch, where the pagans have been converted to Christianity with Paul and Barnabas and others. And it's a long trip. It's like 300 miles, so 15 days at 20 miles a day to get up there. So they're full of zeal, these Pharisees. And they go up and they tell the Gentile converts, the pagan converts to Christianity, that you only got half the program. You have to also follow all these Old Testament customs. You need to be circumcised. You need to follow the Jewish dietary laws. You need to observe certain feast, the same Jewish feast that the Jews had. And then, if you do all that, then you'll be a Christian. And so about that time when they're in Antioch, St. Paul and Barnabas complete their first missionary journey. So they've been out for 2 years, across the island of Cyprus, up north to Turkey, all through central Turkey, performing miracles, establishing churches, making converts, seeing the Holy Spirit come into the Gentiles. And so then they make their way back to Antioch. And they're astounded at what these Jewish converts, the Pharisees converted, are saying in Antioch. And they get into an argument. And it's a big crisis. So they decide to go to Jerusalem. So they go back 300 miles south to have a meeting. And it's the first ecumenical council. And so it's the year 47 A.D. And they meet with St. James and St. Peter. St. James is the head of the church in Jerusalem. St. Peter is, of course, the rock, the Pope. And so they present their arguments. And St. James says that he quotes from the prophet Amos, which we just heard, and says basically that it was God's plan all along to convert the Gentiles, the pagans, to make them part of the faith, part of the community. And then St. Peter talks, and he says that when Jesus was here, he treated the Gentiles just the same way he did the Jews. And if we were to add additional yokes to them, the yoke of following all the Jewish laws, if you will, if we were to add additional yokes to them, it would only anger Jesus. And so then they decide in favor of St. Paul, write letters to bring back to the new churches for Christians that were Gentiles that had become Christians, to say just simple rules to follow for the faith. And so to sort of summarize it up and bring it together is we want to want Jesus to love us, and so we want to just follow the commandments. But we don't add additional things to them, additional burdens, additional yokes to what God has already given us.